I'm sure. And yeah, so as I've mentioned, leave is split into this EU element and this UK element. So I don't know if you've been following politics recently, although it's been quite a quiet period in politics. But one of the things that the government has kind of dropped in quite quietly, one would argue, is the pithily named Retained EU Revocation and Reform Bill. And essentially, this is a post-Brexit piece of legislation which automatically is going to cancel all domestic UK laws that have their roots in EU law. And that's going to happen on the 31st of December 2023, so in about a year, although there's a possibility for an extension until December 2026. So it may be a ball that's kind of kicked down the road quite far into the road and possibly post an election. But as it stands, they're talking about removing EU law, and it will only be replicated if there is specific legislation brought into effect in the UK. So one of the things that has its roots in EU law is the Working Time Directive regulations. And of course, that does affect the right to paid holiday. So there's 20 days of the leave has its roots in EU legislation. So I'd be very surprised if any government wiped out people's general annual leave entitlement, but it's definitely something that might be tinkered with. Who knows what's going on at the moment, but it's just something to kind of keep your eye on. And of course, we'll bring you any updates. As I say, I don't think they would completely eradicate the right to annual leave, but they may do things like carryover, or does it accrue when you're on annual leave for that length of time, things like that. I can see that being tightened if it's a Tory government. However, we'll just have to wait and see. I don't want to be political, but it's something to keep your eye on, and something for fun and games in the future.
It's not very likely, is it, that they will overhaul the entitlement, simply because it is the first 20 days that come from Europe, and then we as a country top that up further by an extra 1.6 weeks. So yeah, it's not as though we're saying, well, Europe makes us give too many holidays, let's reduce it. We actually give more than we're obliged to give. So that kind of tells you that it's unlikely to do that. But things like the decision that we discussed earlier about being someone converting a holiday into sickness and things like that, that's a European decision that's based on working time regs. And so that then says that if we interpret the working time regs in this country, we're kind of guided by what those kind of cases say. So it's things like that may fall away, or certainly won't be binding on us in the future. So yeah, it'd be an interesting thing. And holidays is just one part of that. There's lots of other things as well, TUPE and a few others.
And yeah, that's it. I canter through annual leave. And I don't know if anyone's got any questions or any burning issues that they want to ask us about. It doesn't necessarily have to be about annual leave. I don't know if you want to throw it open, but...
Morning to you all. Got a question regarding if you've got an employee who's absolutely refusing or doesn't want to take holidays. You've done all you can to make it clear to him how many he's got left and how many he's got to take and regulations, but he's absolutely adamant. Person's got whatever reasons he's got. He might live by himself and he likes coming into work for the company. Is there any process you need to go through to step safely to make sure he knows he's going to lose them, rather than any regulation to make sure we don't fall foul of any steps?
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one, that, because and quite a rare one, really. Someone just doesn't want to take any time off, but different people have different circumstances, so I get that. It throws up a few tricky issues for you, I suppose. If you're purely looking at the entitlement and making him aware that, well, this is your choice and you've got this entitlement, then it would be a case of saying to him, here's your entitlement, you're not going to be able to carry it over, you're going to lose that, you're not going to get paid instead of it. that's not how this works. And because you can't carry it over, then those days are lost. As long as, and you might want to kind of confirm that in a meeting note or a letter or something like that, then that kind of takes care of his entitlement. But probably the bigger issue is, even though it's his choice, if something was to happen, let's say he works in a job where, it's not ideal if he's fatigued or doesn't have the necessary breaks. I think there is an onus on you to make sure he's getting those rest breaks. So you may want to think about taking a firmer line and saying, well, we get that, but it's really important for health and safety, or safety of your colleagues, mental health, things like that you get those breaks, even if you think you don't want to. And so what we're going to do is we are going to exercise our right to designate you as taking holidays. And so they're going to be, we'd like you to choose them, but if you don't, it's going to be next week and then the week after. And we're expecting you to take those days as holiday, and see if that finally gets through when he thinks, okay, well, I'm being made to do it, so I'll do it. I would be reluctant to let that go on for too long, because obviously, fingers crossed it wouldn't happen, but worst case scenario, let's say he has an accident at work, and that contributes to it, fatigue or lack of rest, and you're saying in your defence, well, we tried to, but he didn't want to. I don't think that would necessarily clear you of all liability if HSC or a personal injury claim was brought or something. So protecting yourself, I'd be looking at other ways to really make sure he does take that time.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. I would be going from a kind of pastoral care approach. And it may, sometimes these things that can open up into a wider discussion about, maybe difficulties that the employee has, the reason they didn't want to be at home. And that's maybe, there's obviously only so much an employer can do, but just to have that kind of supportive discussion, and ultimately to kind of frame it as in the employee's benefit to ultimately take some time away from work and refresh. Yeah. Anything else?
Can I ask, because are we allowed to, I'm sure everyone else knows the answer to this, but can you actually reject holiday requests easily? I've never done it, I've never needed to, but I just wondered if they were on a date that I knew that I needed them to be in the office, could I say no?
Usually in your contract of employment, you will have a clause that will say employees need to be agreed, and annual leave needs to be agreed with your line manager, and we reserve the right to refuse annual leave at particular times. And it can happen. You're not refusing the employee annual leave at all, but of course, if you've got a team of 6 and 5 of them all want to be off at the same time, for instance, it might be school holidays, obviously it's going to be very tricky to allow. So the short answer is yes, you can refuse at particular times. And I've had employers who've had to have very kind of tricky rating systems where lots of employees ask for time off at the same time, and they go into a kind of ranking system, and usually it doesn't get as complicated as that, and there's a bit of discussion, and if somebody gets their choice before someone else, then the next time that person maybe gets preference or whatever, but absolutely yes, you can refuse it.
Cool. And then sorry, go on.
I was going to say, yeah, absolutely you can. The only issues I've ever seen with that is where either the employee is doing this or the employee just alleges it that, well, every time I ask, I'm refused, and then I get to the end of the year and I haven't had a chance to take the holidays. So if you're refusing, it's just a case of making sure either that you offer alternative dates, or at least you're making sure they get a chance at another time of year and to take that up. The other thing that we tend to include in contracts is to tell employees that they shouldn't make any arrangements or bookings until they've had your approval. I have had that in the past where people say, can I have this holiday? And you say, well, it's going to be really busy. And so-and-so's already off. So can you do next week instead? And they say, oh, well, I booked it now. I'm going to lose 200 quid on a flight. Actually, I wish flights were 200 quid, but
I was going to say, was this 1950?
Yeah, it was when I first qualified. Yeah, so you get that, I've booked a hotel, I've committed to it, and then they're blaming you for losing money. So trying to make it clear, whether that's ideally in the contract or a holiday policy that says, you need to get our approval, and we may or may not give that, and you shouldn't make any arrangements until you've had our approval.
Yeah.
And that
What
just
about-
helps. Sorry, go on, Paul.
So, well, is this because in our contract it says, what does it say? It says holiday and where is it? All requests for holiday must be authorized in advance by the employee's line manager. So that kind of answers that. But does it? We don't have it written down anywhere that they need to give a minimum amount of notice for a holiday. So I often get people saying, "Oh, can I?" I don't mind if it's like having a day here or there, or it comes quite quickly. But if someone comes up to me and says, "Oh, I want to be on holiday next week or week," then I've kind of got a bee in my bonnet about it. But I don't know where we stand legally on that, because I can't see anywhere that we've ever told them to give us notice. I don't know if there's a legal requirement to do that.
I don't think you necessarily, it's up to you how you want to manage it. Sometimes you might, one approach might be to say, well, we don't need that, because if someone does ask me in short notice, then that's going to be my response. I can't allow it next week because it's too short notice and I can't arrange cover, or I can't move a deadline or something like that. And so it's not that they had to get it in time. It's just that I judged the request and I can't accommodate it for these reasons. However, you could also, if you wanted to, set that, as long as it was still that it's not just a case of get it in a month ahead of time and it will always be approved. You still want to make it clear that you can reject or approve any request at your discretion. But it may help, if you find that as a problem, it may help to kind of set that as a workplace standard, or if you did want to put it in the contracts to say, look, we would like you to give us X amount of notice of any request, and then any request will be judged, and it'll be at your discretion. So you don't have to have it, but if it helps you solve a problem and it helps you get more notice and better planning, then by all means you can have it. And you can have it on a consistent basis. That would be best. But if it's something that specifically calls upon for your team, then it's probably a communication thing to say to everyone, look, you know how we work, you know the deadlines we work to. Best off if you give me as much notice as possible of requests. And that kind of thing.
Sometimes employers don't want to have time frames in the contract, because it doesn't give them the flexibility, because sometimes a week will be enough and other times you need a month, busy periods or whatever, and they don't want to be bound by that kind of time frame. But yeah, I think I agree with Gareth, as he was saying, just to speak to your team and say, obviously the more notice I have, the easier it is for me to arrange cover, and the more likely you are to be granted it, and leave it at that. Ultimately, you have the right to refuse, and so you can do it to suit the needs of the business without any mention of it in the contract.
Questions popped up in the chat from Gary.
Oh yeah.
Isn't there a legal minimum time to request double the time requested, e.g. 2 weeks? That's more for a very clear obligation on the employer. So if the employer wants to use their right to designate holiday, they need to give that amount of notice. And then there are rules around if you refuse requests, then kind of offering alternative dates and things like that can get quite complicated. So yeah, you're right, Gary. There is an element of that to it, but ultimately, the company or the employer does have a decent amount of leeway to reject and approve holidays as they see fit.
Yeah.
Do we have any more questions? We've not covered today, actually. Not from a legal point of view, but just kind of more of a cultural fit that you see quite a lot of talk, or there certainly was recently, around kind of unlimited holidays and things like that. And people can take as much time off as they want, and we're not gonna limit it to 28 days a year and things like that. And people seeing that as a cultural positive. approach for a business, and actually then more recently there's been a bit of backlash against that in terms of, far from actually encouraging holidays, it puts people off because they don't really know how to play it. If they have an entitlement, they kind of feel a bit more comfortable with saying, well, I'm using my entitlement that you give me. But if there's just a complete, just take as much as you need, they worry that that might be
judged.
You might be judged on, oh, you need a holiday, do you? Okay. So a lot of the thinking around it has actually shifted more towards maybe giving a more generous but specific entitlement, rather than just leaving it open-ended and seeing that it doesn't really have the impact it was designed for.
Claire, do you have a question?
Yes, I was going to ask a quick question, please. It's about payment in lieu of holidays, and I'm not at all advocating payment in lieu of holidays. I would very rarely do this, but my understanding was that that there was some leeway in being able to pay if you gave holidays that were in excess of the 5.6 weeks. Is that correct?
Yeah, so that ties into this idea that what people's legal entitlements are. Under the working time regs, it's all about getting a week's pay for a week's holiday. And so if you're very clear, for example, in your contracts that you can do that, then that's not necessarily going to fall foul of the working time regs, because you're still making sure they've been paid properly for their minimum holiday entitlement. And then rolling up unused excess holiday, that can come down to more of a contractual agreement with your employees. So yeah, in theory that could work. I haven't seen that be done too often, just because it can get quite complicated in terms of, we can do this with this, but we can't do it with that. And employees don't necessarily follow what's going on. So they may be confused or complain or worry that they're not getting their entitlements. So unless you're kind of addressing a particular issue or cultural point, and you're basically trying to say, look, we give you this, but if you don't get to use it, we want to still make sure you get the advantage of it. So here's the pay in lieu. I'd probably stay away from that kind of thing, just because it can get really complicated. But you're right, if you're not dealing with the working time minimums, then you do have that more leeway.
Yeah, it's not something I'd be particularly stating in contracts, but every now and then you just get an odd situation where you think that would be handy if I could just pay somebody the 3 days that are over that entitlement.
Yeah.
So if I did that, I wouldn't be falling foul of the law.
No, and you'd probably be doing that by agreement and discussion and that kind of thing, and trying to strike a balance with the employee of saying, look, letting you roll these things over for years on end or for a few years is just causing disruption. They're just building up too much. You didn't take it 1 year, are you going to be able to take more the next year? It just perhaps not. So you might want to say, look, is this just a better way of compromising and drawing a line under it now? Again, you might tread carefully if the reason for the underuse has been sickness or has been maternity leave and things like that. You might tread more carefully around that and discuss that with the employees and get them on board in terms of what you've agreed to do. But yeah, it all can get really complicated. And I suppose as long as you're a business trying to, which I know you would be, is trying to be fair on both sides and trying to say, look, we don't want you to lose out on entitlements, so this is our proposal. That can really help.
Brilliant, thank you.
Oh, just got a question there from Paul in the chat box. What's the deal with unpaid leave? I guess the only one I'm aware of is unpaid parental leave, 18 weeks unpaid. Yeah, that's right. 1 week per year. Yeah, so unpaid leave is, in that context that Paul's describing, I think everyone can see the question, can they, if you just click on the chat box. Unpaid leave in that context is a very specific right to time off to care for a child, and it's kind of a long period of time, and it helps people to deal with their responsibilities, their parental responsibilities, etc., in their personal lives, and that's a very specific right, and there's ways of how that kicks in and what they're entitled to do when they come back to work and things like that. If we're thinking on a more short-term basis, like unpaid holidays, I do see sometimes businesses allowing people to take, say, over their holiday entitlement, so they'll let them have the time off, but it's agreed that that's unpaid. So you've used all your holidays, but you want an extra break, or you want some extra time off. Agreeing that those times go down as unpaid, and often that can be done by agreement, and that's all fine. But if you're looking at something kind of more permanent, or more, I'm doing this for so I can take care of my child who, you know, sadly has become ill, or needs me to take some time off to support them, then you'd probably want to be triggering this kind of more formal type of leave, just so you've got it on the correct footing and you can demonstrate that you've supported the employee in the right way. You know, they came to us, we made them aware of the leave that's available to them, they're using that, and then they get certain protections as well. They, for example, can't be dismissed or subject to a detriment for using that right, and it gives them protection as well as the business. So on an ad hoc basis, yeah, I do see people they've used all the holidays, but they want an extra day off. It's fine by me, but it's unpaid, we've agreed it. That's all fine, just document it. But on a more permanent basis, yeah, you'd be using things like the parental leave that Paul's flagged up.
And there are limits on the way that leave can be used. So an employee can't just build up this kind of right and then hit you with, you know, I want loads, you know, loads and loads of, I haven't used it for 5 years or 7 years, so now I want to use X number of weeks. It doesn't work like that. There are limits in the way that the leave has to be taken, and they can't build it up, and it also has to be done in discussion, and it's a statutory scheme, so it does eventually expire or you exhaust the leave.
And there is also kind of, on an emergency basis, there is a right to time off for dependents as well. So we're kind of veering into a slightly different track, but if people suddenly need a day off to deal with their children who are off school ill and they haven't got any other care arrangements for them, there is a statutory entitlement to deal with that situation. And it really is designed to deal with the emergency there and then and put other arrangements in place. So we typically think a day and a half, maybe a couple of days tops for that kind of leave.
Yeah.
And again, it's unpaid, but it just gives the employee a bit of protection that they can take that time, and it just puts it in place. Now, often again, just to bring it back to the holidays, often again, people might prefer to take holidays to deal with that because they want to get paid and they have some holidays to use. So they say, you know, I'm going to be off tomorrow, can I take it as a holiday? And then at least they get paid. And normally as the employer, you're happy with that because they're using into their entitlements. They're not going to use it at another time when they're also going to be off. So those kind of conversations are the types of things that I'm sure we all have had many times with employees, and that's where they can interact. Do we have any more questions just before we wrap everything up? No? Well, that's good. So yeah, we just wanted to flag up as well before we finish that moving into the next session in this series, we'll be covering flexible working in a month's time. Can't remember the exact, towards the end of, it was the 24th of November. Similar sort of session on flexible working, so hopefully everyone can join us then. If anyone does have any ideas for topics that we can give the kind of everything you want to know treatment to, please do share them with us, and if we haven't covered it, we're more than happy to do that. We've gone through quite a lot of and we've still got plenty left in the series, but we've gone through a lot of the big hitters, and actually now it might be a good opportunity to put it out to you guys and say, you know, if there are any areas you want to see covered, we can do that because we obviously want to make it as useful as we can for you. So won't put anyone on the spot today, but yeah, drop us a line if there is anything that you think might be useful to cover.
Great, thank you.
Cool. Cheers, guys.
Thank
No worries.
Thank you, guys. Super helpful.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Cheers.